Let me start with a simple test that will tell you whether you're about to win in 2026 or whether 2026 is about to happen to you. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and someone hands you a machine that can do the middle of your job almost perfectly. Not the visionary part, not the leadership part, not the ethical part, the middle, the drafting, the first pass, the research, the summarizing, the planning, the formatting, the translation, the coordination, the follow-ups, the part you thought proved you were competent. Now ask yourself, if the middle becomes cheap, what are you? Most people have never faced that question, because historically, the middle was where careers lived. You studied to get good at the middle. You worked hard to get fast at the middle. You got promoted because you did the middle reliably. But in 2026, we cross a line where the middle collapses in value across industry after industry, and that forces a brutal redefinition of what skill means. This is why Jensen Huang's way of thinking matters here. He doesn't talk about AI like it's a toy or a feature. He talks about it like a platform shift, a new industrial revolution where the main resource being produced is intelligence. And that changes everything, because when intelligence becomes something you can manufacture at scale, the economy reorganizes around whoever can build the factories, control the supply chains of compute, and deploy intelligence safely into the real world. So when you hear 5 big innovations coming in 2026, don't think 5 apps, think 5 tectonic plates moving at the same time. And the part that will shock you is not any single one. It's what happens when they stack. Because stacked technologies don't evolve politely. They jump. And I want to do something different in this script. I don't want to give you a list and call it a day. I want to walk you through the mental model. Jensen's kind of mental model, so you feel how these innovations connect like gears in one machine. Because if you can see the machine, you can position yourself inside it. If you can't, you'll spend all of 2026 reacting to symptoms. Here are the 5 innovations that are about to define 2026. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of them will feel boring, one will feel magical, one will feel scary, one will feel inevitable, and one will feel political. But the truth is, they're all the same thing from different angles. First innovation, the rise of AI factories as the default form of computing. Most people still think computing is a device, a laptop, a phone, a cloud server. Even when they say the cloud, they imagine a vague place where their files live. Jensen forces you into a different frame. The data center is becoming a factory, not metaphorically, functionally. You put in electricity and capital. You feed in data, you run accelerated computing, and what comes out is intelligence, predictions, recommendations, generated designs, simulations, digital twins, drug candidates, robotic policies, translations, speech, decision support. And this sounds abstract until you realize how the world behaves when something becomes industrial. When electricity became industrial, it stopped being a curiosity and became a utility. Entire cities reorganized. Businesses that didn't electrify didn't fall behind. They disappeared. When the internet became industrial, it stopped being a nerd experiment and became a global nervous system. Companies that didn't adapt didn't miss an opportunity. They got replaced by companies that treated connectivity like oxygen. AI is now at that point. And 2026 is the year the factory metaphor becomes literal in business planning, in government strategy, and in the way products are built. Here's what changes in 2026. These AI factories become more standardized, more modular, and more purchasable. Instead of we need a research team to figure out AI, it becomes we need capacity. You will hear executives talk about inference the way they talk about logistics. You will hear governments talk about compute the way they talk about energy grids and ports. Because when intelligence is manufactured, it has supply constraints. Chips, memory, interconnect, networking, power, cooling, physical space, security, latency, and once it has constraints, it becomes strategic. It becomes something you compete over, plan for, defend, and localize. Jensen's entire NVIDIA story is basically a decades-long lesson in platforms. The winner is not the person with a single fast component, but the person who builds an ecosystem where everything is optimized together. Hardware, software, networking, developer tools, deployment models. In 2026, that platform thinking becomes the dominant reality for AI. And here's the part most people miss. AI factories aren't one thing. They split into types. There will be training factories, massive systems that create foundation models and industry-specific models. There will be inference factories optimized to serve intelligence in real time to millions of users, like a utility. There will be simulation factories designed to run physics and virtual environments at scale, to train robots, optimize factories, test supply chains, simulate climate, design materials, There will be sovereign factories built by countries or regions that decide it's too dangerous to import the intelligence layer of their society from external providers. If you take Jensen's worldview seriously, the question stops being who has the best model and becomes who can manufacture intelligence reliably, efficiently, securely, and at scale. Because the model is only one ingredient. The factory is the product. Now, if the first innovation is the factory, the second innovation is the foreman, the thing that turns intelligence into action. Second innovation, agentic AI. AI that doesn't just answer questions, but executes workflows. We've had the era of chat, prompt in, answer out. That was the opening act. Useful, impressive, but still mostly a tool you actively drive. 2026 is where AI starts behaving less like a calculator and more like a worker. Not a human worker in feelings, an operational worker. You give it a goal, it decomposes it into steps, it selects tools, it calls APIs, it searches databases, it drafts messages. It checks constraints, it retries, it asks you for approval where risk is high. It tracks progress, it delivers an outcome. That shift sounds small until you feel it. Outcomes, not outputs. Outputs are cheap, outcomes are valuable. An output is here's a draft email. An outcome is the meeting is booked, the calendar invite is sent, the agenda is attached, the doc is prepared, the stakeholders are aligned, and the follow-up is scheduled. An output is here's code. An outcome is the feature is shipped, tested, monitored, and rolled back safely if it fails. An output is here's a plan. An outcome is the plan is executed with feedback loops and adjustments. This is why agentic AI is the kind of innovation that reshapes what jobs are. Because once the steps are automated, your role becomes direction, judgment, and accountability. And that is exactly the dividing line Jensen keeps pointing toward in his advice. It's not enough to learn a tool. You need to learn how to think, how to reason about systems, how to apply first principles, how to understand a domain deeply. Because in a world of agents, the person who can define the right objective and evaluate the result becomes more valuable than the person who can do the steps. In 2026, agents will invade three categories first, because the economics are brutal. The first category is digital operations, scheduling, research, summarizing, document handling, CRM updates, customer support triage, internal reporting, compliance prep, procurement workflows. The second category is content pipelines, writing, editing, captioning, localization, thumbnail ideation, A/B title testing, short form repurposing, SEO packaging, distribution scheduling. The third category is software and infrastructure, code generation, testing, deployment scripting, incident response suggestions, log analysis, configuration management, security scanning assistance. And you'll notice something, agents don't replace the genius. They replace the glue. The connective tissue work that keeps everything moving. That means companies will suddenly be able to run leaner. A small team with agents will perform like a larger team without them. And just like every efficiency wave in history, the winners won't simply save time. They'll reinvest it into expansion. They'll ship more, they'll test more, they'll market more, they'll iterate faster, they'll dominate attention. So what happens to the person whose identity is, I am the glue? They feel invisible. They feel replaced. They feel like the ladder they climbed is being pulled up. But the person who becomes a director of agents becomes a different species of worker. They don't do tasks. They build systems that do tasks. They don't manage time. They manage leverage. Now here's where it gets intense. Agentic AI does not stay in your computer. Because the moment you have agents that can plan and coordinate, the next logical step is to connect them to sensors and machines. Which brings us to innovation number 3, physical AI. Robots and machines trained through simulation and synthetic experience. Most people still think robotics is slow. They think robots are expensive, hard to program, brittle, limited to factories, and mostly about repetitive motion. Jensen's bet has been robotics becomes inevitable when we solve the brain, not the body. And the brain is trained by experience. But the real world is too expensive and too slow to generate enough experience. So you manufacture experience. This is where digital twins and simulation become the hidden superpower of 2026. If you want to train a robot to work in a warehouse, you can't just show it one warehouse. Warehouses vary, lighting changes, boxes differ, people walk through, slippery floors, broken labels, unexpected shapes, random clutter. Real life is adversarial. Training in the real world is slow, dangerous, and limited. So the trick is to create an environment where the robot can fail 1,000,000 times per day without breaking anything. That is simulation at scale. In 2026, the big change is not we have robots. The change is that the training loop becomes industrialized. The same factory concept from Innovation 1 now produces robotic competence. A robot's childhood happens in accelerated virtual worlds. It learns policies, it learns to perceive, it learns to coordinate with other robots, it learns to handle edge cases. Then those policies get deployed into physical machines that can now operate with far less manual coding. This is a platform shift because it turns robotics from a custom engineering project into a repeatable pipeline. And once you have a pipeline, the scaling begins. Not overnight everywhere, but in predictable waves. First wave, logistics, warehousing, sorting, inventory movement, inspection, places where environments are semi-structured and ROI is obvious. Second wave, manufacturing flexibility, robots that can handle more variation, not just one motion repeated forever. Third wave, agriculture support, monitoring, targeted spraying, harvesting assistance in controlled settings. Fourth wave, construction support and maintenance, inspection drones, mapping, autonomous equipment in constrained areas. Fifth wave, healthcare assistance tasks, not surgery dreams, but real operational help. Transport, sterilization support, basic monitoring tasks, supply movement. The key point is, physical AI moves the economy because it touches atoms. When automation leaves the screen, it changes labor markets in a different way than software ever did. And notice how this connects to agentic AI. Now, the agent is not only clicking buttons in software, it's dispatching tasks to machines, coordinating fleets, monitoring sensors, adjusting schedules based on live constraints. This is why 2026 is when people begin to feel that AI is not just writing text, it's reorganizing reality. Now, if that sounds like the story is already big enough, it gets bigger. Because there is an invisible barrier that has kept the world segmented for centuries. And AI is about to smash it in a way that feels almost supernatural. Innovation number 4, universal translation becomes a communication layer, not an app. People hear translation and say we already have that. And yes, we've had translation tools for a long time. But what we have had is translation as a deliberate action. You open a tool, you paste text, you translate, you copy. What happens in 2026 is translation becomes ambient, continuous, real-time, integrated, multimodal. You speak and the listener hears their language. You watch a video and it's available instantly in your language with natural timing. You join a meeting and the entire conversation is being translated both ways without friction. Support chats, tutoring, onboarding, sales calls, medical explanations, training programs, creator content, everything becomes borderless. This is not convenience. This is economic rewiring. Language has been one of the last major barriers to labor markets, consumer markets, and idea markets. It has acted like a wall that protected certain economies and limited competition. When that wall collapses, 3 things happen immediately. First, talent becomes global in a more aggressive way. A skilled person in one country can serve clients in another without the usual friction. That increases competition, but it also increases opportunity. The world market for skill expands. Second, education becomes more fluid. People can consume knowledge in their own language instantly. The long lag between an innovation happening in one language and reaching another language shrinks dramatically. Third, content becomes a global battlefield. Memes, narratives, persuasion, ideology, everything spreads faster across cultures. That creates cultural fusion, but also cultural conflict, because the friction that used to slow down the spread of narratives disappears. Jensen's view of AI is not cool chatbots. It's the idea that AI makes new layers of infrastructure possible. Translation becomes one of those layers. It becomes like the internet itself, a background assumption. And once translation is ambient, it changes the definition of market. Your market is no longer your language group. Your market becomes anyone on earth with the same need. For creators, this is explosive. A channel, a course, a product, a service can suddenly scale beyond language boundaries if you build your system for it. But it also means competition intensifies because everyone else can do it too. So what becomes the differentiator? Not access, not language, quality, trust, taste, brand, domain expertise, the things that are hard to fake, even with AI. And that word trust is the bridge to the 5th innovation, because when intelligence becomes manufactured, agents become active, robots enter the physical world, and translation makes the world one continuous market. The question becomes unavoidable. Who controls the intelligence? Who is accountable when it fails? Who audits it? Who can verify what happened? Innovation number 5, trust infrastructure. Sovereign AI, confidential deployment, verification and governance becomes part of the product. In the early era of AI, trust was a debate. People argued about bias, hallucinations, safety, misinformation, important discussions, but often abstract. In 2026, trust becomes operational. It becomes engineering, it becomes law, it becomes procurement. It becomes a requirement. Because as agents begin executing actions, you can't treat AI like a toy. You need to know where data goes. You need to know what the model did. You need logging. You need access control. You need policy enforcement. You need monitoring. You need rollback. You need audit trails. Think about this. A chatbot that makes a mistake is annoying. An agent that makes a mistake can spend money, leak data, break systems, commit compliance violations, or trigger real-world consequences. A robot that makes a mistake can damage physical property or injure someone. A translation layer that makes a mistake can alter meaning in legal context, medical context, or political context. So trust becomes infrastructure. This is why Jensen's sovereign AI idea has real weight. It's not just a slogan. It's a recognition that intelligence is strategic. If your government, your healthcare system, your education system, your public services depend on models you don't control, you're outsourcing sovereignty. If your enterprise runs its core operations on an opaque system you can't audit, you're building on sand. In 2026, you see an acceleration of private AI deployments where sensitive data stays local, confidential computing approaches where workloads can run with stronger security guarantees, model governance systems that track versions, behavior changes, data provenance, and policy compliance, regulatory frameworks that force organizations to document and manage risk. And here's the important point. Trust infrastructure is not a brake on AI. It's an accelerator. It's what allows AI to scale into high-stakes domains: medicine, finance, government, defense, critical infrastructure, without collapsing into chaos. So now you've heard the 5 innovations, but if you're smart, you're realizing something uncomfortable. These aren't separate trends. They are one system. AI factories manufacture intelligence. Agents turn intelligence into action. Physical AI turns action into real-world movement. Universal translation turns intelligence into global communication without friction. Trust infrastructure turns the entire machine into something deployable at scale. That is the 2026 stack. And the reason most people will feel overwhelmed is they will experience it as random disruptions. More layoffs here, weird new tools there, strange social changes there, regulations here, new robotics demos there. But if you see the stack, it's not random. It's a machine being assembled. Now let's take Jensen's perspective one step deeper. When a machine like this is assembled, the bottleneck is never the thing people think it is. People think the bottleneck is the model, or the chip, or the app. But Jensen has always pointed at the full system. The bottleneck moves. It moves from compute to data, to energy, to deployment, to trust, to distribution, to skills. And in 2026, the bottleneck that moves into the spotlight is the human bottleneck, the capacity of people to adapt their identity. Because the hardest thing to change is not technology. It's the human story about what makes them valuable. Most people built their story around tasks. I'm valuable because I can do this. In 2026, tasks get automated, so their story collapses. The people who win build their story around direction. I'm valuable because I can decide what matters, coordinate systems, and own outcomes. If you want to survive 2026, you need to climb one layer up the stack. Let's translate that into reality. If you're in business, the biggest mistake you can make is using AI only to cut costs. That's what every lazy company does first. They say, how do we automate customer support? How do we reduce headcount? How do we speed up content? That's not the winning move. The winning move is using AI to expand capability, to launch products faster, to personalize experiences at scale, to test more hypotheses, to enter more markets, to build global distribution with translation, to simulate new designs before manufacturing them, to run operations with agents. Cutting costs makes you leaner. Expanding capability makes you dominant. If you're an employee, the biggest mistake is thinking your goal is to use AI. Everyone will use AI. That will be baseline. Your goal is to become the person who can define the right problems and evaluate the results, the person who can take a vague goal and turn it into a system, the person who can spot when the agent is wrong, the person who can catch the edge case, the person who can take responsibility. If you're a creator, the biggest mistake is thinking AI is a content generator. It is. But so what? Everyone will generate content. The feed will be flooded. In 2026, content becomes cheap in the same way photos became cheap when everyone got a camera. The winners aren't the people who can make content. The winners are the people who can create signal, a point of view, a taste, a brand, a structure that retains attention, a distribution engine. And yes, translation will turn your local audience into a glade. Now, I want to sharpen something because it's going to decide who panics and who wins. In 2026, many people will try to protect themselves by learning more hard skills in the old sense, more coding, more design software, more editing techniques, more tools. Those skills still matter, but their value changes. Jensen's warning to students when he says things that sound like don't just learn to code, and the future is about working with AI. What he's pointing to is not that skills are useless, it's that the nature of skills changes. If a machine can generate code, then coding becomes less about typing and more about architecture, system thinking, constraint definition, testing, and deployment. The skill moves up a layer. The same is true for every domain. Writing becomes less about producing sentences and more about constructing narratives that hold attention and carry meaning. Design becomes less about manipulating pixels and more about taste, brand coherence, user psychology, and experience. Business becomes less about spreadsheets and more about strategy, differentiation, risk management, and execution with agents. Medicine becomes less about memorization and more about interpretation, patient trust, ethical decisions, and applying AI safely. And this is where Jensen's obsession with accelerated computing and simulation reveals the deeper truth. AI is a multiplier. It multiplies whatever you already are. If you have weak judgment, AI will multiply your mistakes faster. If you have shallow taste, AI will multiply your mediocrity faster. If you have strong thinking, AI will multiply your leverage. So the real question is not, what will AI do in 2026? The real question is, who will you be when AI becomes infrastructure? Now let me walk you through a scenario that will feel uncomfortably realistic by the end of 2026. A mid-sized company decides to build its own internal AI factory capacity, not necessarily by owning all the hardware, but by securing reliable compute, building an inference pipeline, and integrating models into workflows. They deploy agentic systems across departments. In sales, agents research accounts, draft outreach, schedule follow-ups, and update CRM automatically. In marketing, agents generate variations, localize content into multiple languages, test hooks, and optimize distribution. In operations, agents forecast demand, handle procurement workflows, and monitor logistics. In engineering, agents assist coding, testing, and incident response. They connect this to simulation tools for product design and supply chain stress testing. And then, because translation is ambient, they don't treat language as a limitation. They enter new markets. They run support in multiple languages. They recruit talent globally. But they don't collapse into chaos because they invested in trust infrastructure, logging, access controls, monitoring, human approval for high-stakes actions, compliance documentation, model version tracking. Now compare that to a competitor who uses AI like a toy. They use it to generate a few blog posts. They use it to draft some emails. They cut a few costs. They post some AI art. They feel modern. And then they wonder why they're losing market share. That's 2026. The gap is not who uses AI. The gap is who builds systems. This is why Jensen's platform worldview matters so much. He doesn't just build chips, he builds ecosystems where the chips are useful. He cares about the entire pipeline from computation to deployment. Because the value is not in the component, it's in the system that turns computation into outcomes. And in 2026, the world shifts towards system builders. Now I can hear a skeptical voice, okay, but is this really 2026? Isn't this still years away? Here's the answer. The timeline is not the same for everyone. Some people will feel it instantly. People in roles with heavy middle work and digital tasks. Others will feel it slower, especially in physical jobs. But the acceleration is real because the stack is assembling now. And there's one more thing that makes 2026 different. The psychology of adoption changes when tools become reliable enough and cheap enough. In early waves, AI felt like a novelty. People tested it, played with it. Then they got frustrated, hallucinations, errors, limitations. In 2026, the key changes are reliability and integration. When agents can check their work, call tools, and operate within guardrails, their error rate becomes manageable. When AI is integrated into the workflows people already use, friction drops. When hardware platforms and inference become more efficient, costs drop. And when costs drop, adoption explodes. That is the pattern of every industrial shift. Once the economics cross a threshold, debate ends and deployment begins. Now let's bring this back to you, because information without positioning is just anxiety. If you want to come out of 2026 stronger, you need to align yourself with the stack, not against it. Here's the simplest framing. Become the person who owns outcomes, not the person who performs tasks. That means training 3 things relentlessly. First, judgment. The ability to make decisions under uncertainty, to spot hidden constraints, to see second-order effects, to choose the right objectives. Second, domain depth. Not shallow tool knowledge, but real understanding of an industry or craft, so you can direct AI meaningfully. Third, taste and ethics. The ability to recognize quality, to build trust, to choose what should exist, not just what can be generated. Because the most dangerous thing about AI in 2026 is that it will make it easy to produce garbage at scale. It will flood every channel. The people who win will be those who can generate signal. Meaningful, trustworthy, high-quality work that stands out. Now I want to end this not with a neat bow, but with the question that Jensen's worldview forces on you. Because in a platform shift, the right question is more valuable than 1,000 tips. If intelligence becomes something factories can manufacture, if agents turn intelligence into action, if robots bring action into the physical world, if translation makes the world one continuous market, and trust infrastructure decides who can deploy at scale, then what are you choosing to become in 2026? A person who competes on tasks, or a person who builds and directs systems? Because the system is coming either way. The only part that's optional is your position inside it.